Hi, Renee. Hi, Nick.
Good morning.
Good morning. I
Hi.
finally got this going.
Good morning.
Let me see. Okay. So I believe we're live. Let me just start my video. Okay, so hi, everyone. All the teachers have been texting me, and so I know they're here. I know they're with us. I apologize. I had internet issues. My daughter got sick on me this morning, and about 10 different things happened, but we're here. I'm glad we're here. So Nick, Renee, thank you. I'm not gonna take any more time, so I'll hand it over to you. Let me make you a co-host so that you guys can share screens.
Sounds great.
Okay, so Nick, I believe you're the co-host now.
Actually, Renee has access to the slideshow, so she could be a co-host as well.
Okay, so there we go.
Okay, so I'm
You're
gonna
on.
start
Thank you.
sharing. No problem. Let's see, where did my slideshow go? Uh-oh. Okay, hold on one second, everybody. Disappeared on me too. Nope, this one.
We thank everyone, all of the teachers and the students, everyone for their patience while we've been getting this presentation ready for you. We are very excited to be able to share with you the special animal for today, which we're about to see on the slideshow once it's up and running.
Yeah, sorry everyone. Okay, let's get rid of this and present. Perhaps.
And then I'll work on getting the questions up. So teachers, please go ahead and use that Google form to submit your questions.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm not sure if some of you joined us last week, but my name is Renee again, and today I am joined by my friend Nick.
Hello, everyone.
We are going to be your tour guides for today. So last time we just introduced ourselves and told us you a little bit about what we do, and I would like to do that again today. So my job at the zoo is a curator of education. And that's kind of a fancy title, but that means that I work in our learning and engagement department, and I have a pretty fun job. I get to take animals from the zoo, so things like snakes and tortoises and hedgehogs and bugs, and I take them out into schools. So I go into classrooms and I teach in classrooms. So that's pretty fun. Sometimes I help with our zoo camp programs. So I get to do a lot of really fun things around the zoo with kids and animals. Nick, you want to tell them a little about your job?
Of course. I, like Renee, am also a curator of education, and I'm someone who does also work in the same team, learning and engagement with her. But my responsibilities are a little bit different, and my job is also fun because I'm what we call the immersive experiences coordinator. So that means I get to work with our teams who do our summer camps and seasonal camps at the zoo, as well as helping to run our sleepover, our overnight programs at the zoo that take place during the school year and during the summertime. So that's a really exciting thing because most of the time we visit the zoo, we only visit it during the daytime. It's very unusual to be visiting the zoo at a time other than the daytime, to be visiting it at night, or to be visiting it where you're actually staying the night over at the zoo and getting to see and hear so many of the things that are so different from a regular day. And that's what I like to do.
That's great. I like to just take a second to tell you a little bit about our jobs, because a lot of people, when they hear that you work at the zoo, the first thing they think is that you're a zookeeper. But I think a lot of people don't know that there are a lot of really cool jobs at the zoo. So Nick and I have some of the best ones, I think. Okay.
We won't tell our friends.
Okay, so we're going to get started today. Our guiding question for the day is, how can variations in a population affect how easy or hard it is for an organism to survive? So we thought about the animals that we had at the zoo, and today we picked the giraffes to study what variation is. So before we dive into that question, I just want to break it down a little bit and define what is variation. So the definition of variation is any difference between individuals in a population. Now you might think about giraffes, and You might not think that there's a lot of difference between all of those animals, but there really are. So if you take a look at different things like their patterns, maybe, or their height, or their colors, or those little horns on their head, they all look really different. So we're going to spend some time looking at our giraffe herd. One animal that it's easy to tell variation, if you're still having a hard time understanding what the word is, but think about dogs. We know dogs, right? Everybody knows what a dog is. And if you think about all the different types of dogs, they're all called dogs, but if you look at them closely, they all look really different. So in dogs, it's really easy to see the variation. In giraffes, you have to look a little closer, but there definitely is variation. So again, we're going to revisit how scientists study things like variation, and a lot of them will slow down to make their I notice and I wonder statements. They make observations about the animals. Maybe it's the way they look. Sometimes it's their behaviors. And then they also will stop and ask questions. So we are going to practice that again today. So first, we are going to meet our herd. These are the giraffes that we have at the zoo. We have 5 giraffes. 4 of them are female, so girls, and 1 is a male. So up in the top right corner, you have Philip. And Philip is really easy to tell because he is the tallest of all the giraffes. So if you see them all walking together, Philip is the tallest one. And if you look closely, he has a really bumpy head compared to all the other giraffes. And his horns, or those things on top of his head, those are called ossicones. If you look, they don't really have any fur or hair on them. But if you look at the other 4 pictures right there, those ones all have like little black tufts of hair. So Philip is really easy to tell. And then if we start going down, the first one on the left is Xanadu. And Xanadu, her distinguishing feature, if you look down on her neck a little bit, is she has that, where that circle is, she has a tuft of hair right there. So one little piece of hair that comes out. So when she's walking, that's what I look for, is that tuft of hair, so I can tell which one is Xanadu. Her nickname is Boo, which is really cute. The next, oops, too fast. Okay, the next one is Sophie. So if you look at Sophie's color compared to the other 4 giraffes, Sophie is really light compared to those. She's almost orange. I don't know if you can see that in the picture. But that's how I tell Sophie apart. And then Hasina, she is a little bit darker than the others. So if you look at that picture, compare Hasina to Sophie, you'll see that Hasina's spots and colors are a little bit darker. And then Sechan is our newest one. That's our baby. And that one is just the smallest one since it's still a baby. So if you see the herd walking, you can easily pick out Sechan from there.
What I love about her is her tufts on top of her ossicones. They're just so fluffy and wild all over the place. Like she just rolled out of bed first thing in the morning.
Yes, they are very fluffy. Okay, so now we are going to practice making our observations. So I want you to all pretend to be a scientist out in the wild, and this is your giraffe herd. So we talked about all the differences that you see between the giraffes, and now we're going to watch this quick little video to see if you can pick out. So if you're the scientist and if you studied these giraffes, can you tell, which one is which? Okay, so that was our giraffe video. So Nick, could you pick out one of the giraffes? Were you able, here, let's go back to this. Were you able to identify any of the individuals?
As quick as we had an opportunity to look at the variation within our herd, I was able to identify 2 of the giraffes really quickly, probably 3 of them based on some of the markers that you shared, Renee. One is Sechan. She was right there off to the side. And of course, she's the smallest of all of the giraffes. So she was a little bit easier to identify. I did look for Philip because you mentioned that he was the biggest of our giraffes, and he's there for a brief moment in the video, but then he quickly disappears as he's running behind the scenes. He might be going to go find a favorite snack of some kind. And I was looking for Boo. I was trying to find her that really distinguishing tuft of hair on the right side of her neck, but I didn't see it because sometimes we didn't have a lot of time for observation. So sometimes we just have to make our observations, assessments based on what we see really quickly. So definitely saw two of them. Thought I saw Boo. Wasn't 100% sure because I didn't have enough time to really look for that distinguishing tuft of hair.
I think I was able to identify Sophie because I think she's the one right in the middle right there still, right here. Because if you look at her color, she does look a lot lighter than the others. So my guess would be that's Sophie. Okay, so we are going to give a little bit of time for questions to come in. And Mr. Jimenez, if you want to start asking, we have one little quick clip right here to show you. Giraffes have a lot of really interesting traits. And because of them, sometimes some of the behaviors they do are a little interesting. So this right here is a quick video of a giraffe drinking water. They have those long necks. So in order to reach, you can see that they have to spread their legs really wide to reach that water.
So people are watching it. They're not an easy thing to do.
Not at all. Okay, so there was that for you. Are there any questions that we want to address at this point?
There are a few, Renee. They're asking, do giraffes live in groups or are they more on their own?
That's a great question. Giraffes do live in groups. They are a herd animal, so they like to live together. There's safety in numbers. So
Good.
Giraffes, they live together and they'll look out. So I showed you this video of the giraffe drinking water, and this is actually one really important reason that giraffes live in herds. When they stop to drink water like this is when they're most vulnerable. So something like a lion might be stalking them, and you saw how long it took the giraffe to spread its legs, and it can't really move that quickly in this position. So the other giraffes are keeping a lookout for it right now. And so they help protect one another. One thing that is really interesting about giraffe groups, if you really look into animals' group names, some of them are pretty funny. So a group of giraffes is called a tower, which I think is pretty cute.
There's a couple of questions on the neck. How long is their neck? How did their neck get so long?
That's a great question about the length of a giraffe's neck. I mean, when we watch this video, we can see that sometimes, having a neck has some advantages and it has some disadvantages. An advantage could be that when your neck is so high, you can see a lot of the area around you, and you can reach different foods that other animals might not be able to get to, which we'll talk a little bit more on later in the presentation. But when you can reach high foods and no other animals can reach them, that means a lot more food for you. But there is also this trade-off where you can see that it's a very awkward thing to have a long neck in some respects. So it makes it harder to reach to something that's all the way down on the ground, like water. There's usually not water waiting up in a tree or a bowl of water waiting for a giraffe. So they have to deal with kind of that awkwardness of getting down low so that they can actually have a good drink. But from observing giraffes, we can also see that they use their necks for other reasons, for communication and for interacting with one another, more so than just for grabbing food and getting things to drink, because that's important. We need food and water in order to survive, but there are definitely some other reasons behind why their necks can be so incredibly long. In some instances, that's more than half their height is just from their neck.
And then how long do giraffes live?
They can live up to 25 years. So sometimes the life expectancy out in the wild is different than it is from the zoo. I'm not sure of all the ages of our giraffes at the zoo, but out in the wild, they can live up to 25 years. At the zoos, they can usually live a little bit longer than that.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the ability to survive. Many animals in the wild deal with how tough it is to survive in the wild. You have to find your own food. You have to avoid predators. It's tough. That's nature. But in the zoo, there's more security. Their food is always being provided for them. They don't have animals that are trying to eat them every day. And on top of that, we also have our medical team, our doctors who work at the zoo, who are responsible for making sure that all of our animals are well taken care of. So that makes a big difference for being able to make sure that they can have very long, full lives in the zoo, more so than they might have out in nature.
Excellent. Here goes an interesting one that I'm excited to get the answer to. Is student is asking, is it true that giraffes have more than one heart?
No, I don't believe they do. They have one heart, but it is actually a pretty big heart because if you think about your own heart, it has to pump the blood through your body. So it pumps the blood to your limbs and it pumps it to your head. Now, if you're a giraffe, you have to get that blood really far because it is below their necks right there. It's kind of in their chest cavity. So the heart has to be able to squeeze that blood all the way up that neck and into their head and their brain. So it's a really big heart, but it's just one.
And there's a way we can actually demonstrate this for everyone. If everyone wants to actually take their arm and pretend like their hand is a giraffe head and stretch it as high as you can, way up above your head, and hold it there. And how long can you hold it there? Right now, your heart is doing what a giraffe's heart has to do. It has to pump blood all the way up above your head to reach all the way out to your hand, your arm, your hand, and your fingertips. And so your heart's actually doing a little bit extra work to make sure that the blood's getting all the way up there. For a giraffe, it's even more so. So this is just like, we'll see who can do this the longest. That's a great question, to see who can keep their arm up as long as a giraffe can keep its neck up.
And then maybe one more question. They're asking how many bones are in a giraffe's neck?
That is a very important observation, because they do have an incredibly long neck. But as Renee was sharing earlier, giraffes, there are many things that giraffes have in common with us because they are mammals. So they have a single heart, they have warm blood, but also there are other features that are part of that. But another thing that mammals have in common is the number of bones in their neck. If you were to take your fingers and feel the bones in your neck, if you feel right on the back of your neck, you can feel there's a few, sometimes you might feel different bumps there. There are 7 bones altogether in a human neck. There are 7 bones altogether in a giraffe's neck. They're just so much longer, so much wider than our own human bones and the bones in the neck of other mammals. But that's another characteristic that almost all mammals have in common, with 1 or 2 exceptions, is the same number of bones in their neck. Theirs are just enormous compared to ours, which are much smaller by comparison.
Yeah, those are good questions, girls and boys. Keep them coming. I think for now we'll take a break on the questions, and that we can learn a little bit more about giraffes.
Okay. So the next part that we want to talk about is being a scientist out in the field. You got to practice a little bit at the zoo there with our herd. And so now we are going to meet one of our zookeepers who is going to tell you a little bit about a project that he worked on out in the field. So I have some pictures of giraffes here from different parts of Africa so that you can see how interesting. I think they look so interesting in their habitats. So the keeper we're going to meet, his name is Mike Bona, and there's a picture of him with a really cute little baby giraffe. So we're going to watch a little video here that will tell you, and he's going to tell you about his project that he did.
Where we were doing the research in Namibia for this project was out in the Namib Desert, the oldest desert in the world. On my trip, I learned basically what conservationists do hands-on working with these animals in the wild. We pretty much had 3 tasks while we were out there. One is just to identify as many giraffes in the region as possible and catalog them. As a keeper at the LA Zoo, being familiar with giraffes helps me with the observation of the giraffes in the wild. When we see a herd of giraffes, we have to document, how many are in a group, what their behavior is, what they're browsing on. And I'm familiar with giraffe behavior. I know kind of what to look for and what to document. One of the other aspects was taking DNA samples, and with this genetic studies, they'll be able to see a group of giraffes in this region and know exactly who's related to who. So they'll have a better idea of their social dynamics. Finally, we attached GPS trackers to 7 giraffes while we're out there, which is a big task that involves sedating an animal, bringing it down, and attaching this small GPS unit to one of the ossicones, which is the horns on the giraffe's head. There was no harm done to any of the giraffes we worked on. A couple of bumps and scrapes for the researchers, but overall it was a massive success, and we were thrilled about that part. In order to protect giraffes, you need to be able to provide protection for their entire habitat. You need to know how wide their habitat is and how far animals migrate, how far they move. You may observe them being in one location for most part of the year, and you think that's their entire habitat. But with the GPS coordinates, who knows? Maybe we'll find out that there's 1 or 2 months out of the year where they travel far distance away from the habitat you usually find them in, and that is not protected. So that's probably the most important information when doing the research on giraffes. Being able to see these giraffes in a barren desert survive, it really gives me an...
Okay, so that was Mike, and we just got to watch a little clip on that. Just to summarize the video, he got to go out to a country in Africa, and he got to study them in the wild. And you heard that he had to, what some of his tasks were to identify the individuals. So that's where looking for variations within the animals is really important. They have to do it kind of far away. So he might have used things like binoculars to help him. They were talking about GPS trackers. So they attached those to some of the giraffes so they could tell how far they move. They took blood samples so they can check the DNA, because sometimes within their bodies they are changing. So they got to do some really cool research out in the wild. So here I have another quick little video of a giraffe, pretty cool adaptation that helps them survive. We talked about adaptations last time, but here, oh no, go back. Here is a quick little video of one of the really cool things that giraffes can do. Oops. You can see that long tongue that they have.
How long is their tongue, Renee?
Okay, so we can take a couple more questions if there were any questions about doing research out in the wild or identifying some of the variations.
Oh, and Pedro, I think you just had a question you were just sharing just a minute ago as well.
Yes, they were asking how long the tongue is.
Oh, that's a great question. Their tongue can be up to 21 inches long. So that's almost 2 feet long.
Wow.
And to think about this and things that we can measure that might be in our own home, if you have popsicles, if you were to take popsicle sticks and lay them end over end together, 1, 2, 3 popsicle sticks, that's a close approximation for exactly how long a giraffe's tongue can be. And all that just goes all out to grab those leaves and then comes right back into their mouth.
Wow. Okay, we also have several questions about the spots on a giraffe. Is how many spots do they have? Are there any giraffes without spots?
Ooh, that's a great question. So giraffes all have really unique spots. We like to think of them like your fingerprints. Humans all have individual fingerprints. You won't find the same fingerprints with 2 people. So same thing with giraffes. They all have very individual spots. And that is one of the variations that you can actually look for if you're trying to identify some of the giraffes. I have not heard of any giraffes that don't have spots. Nick, have you?
There are some very, very rare individuals. And this is one of those questions that's important, because when we think about giraffes, we have sort of a picture in our heads of what a giraffe looks like. And everything we've seen is like, that looks like a giraffe, just like this giraffe that we see on the left-hand side of our screen, or the giraffes we've seen in these videos. But sometimes there are, special individuals that are different, and that's part of what variation is. There have been some stories over the last few years about albino giraffes, where they still have, those are not whole populations, but those are special individuals who they have a different pigmentation, where it's actually no pigmentation. They have spots, but they don't really have the same color difference as the rest of their body, where they're almost completely white from head to toe, and their eyes are even pinkish in color. And there are other individuals that are what are called leucistic giraffes, where they're more still white, but instead of having pink eyes, they have blue eyes. And those are conditions that are not just unique to giraffes. You can see that in other animals. You can see that across the animal kingdom. You can even see that in some people. So that is, part of what variation is that it may not be a whole population of difference, but you might see those individuals that are a little different.
Thank you. And I think you both talked about this at the beginning. I don't know if maybe we had a couple of classes that came in a little late. Is they're asking, why do they have horns, and what do they use the horns for?
Oh, so if we can hold on to that one, we do have a slide that kind of shows you a little bit about their horns. And so we'll talk about that in just a second.
Okay.
And it's another fun reason to share. So we definitely
Yeah, so we have a picture that helps illustrate it. So we'll come back to that question.
Okay. They're asking about baby giraffes. How do baby giraffes eat? And what do they eat?
That's a great question. At baby giraffes, one really interesting fact about them is when they're born, they are already 6 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
So they are already born really tall. And one of the reasons they're that tall is because mom is really tall. So baby, if you think about one of the characteristics of mammals is that they drink milk. So the baby giraffe doesn't necessarily have to be tall enough to reach the trees, but it does have to be tall enough to reach the milk from the mom.
Wow.
So they are already 6 feet tall when they're born. And they grow pretty quickly too, because they do have, if they were out in the wild, they do have to find ways to get food. So they grow pretty quickly.
And then maybe one last one before we go on to the next segment is a few students are asking, how fast can they run?
So this is a fun question for giraffes, because to look at giraffes, when they run, just like in the video we saw of Mike while he was doing his research out in the field, they can have a top speed of almost 37 miles an hour, and that's a sprint for a giraffe. But when you look at them, their legs aren't running really fast in order to, account for that speed, but it owes to how tall giraffes are, and it's their stride, how long it takes them to go from one footstep to another. They can cover a lot more ground and hit that high speed because they're taking wider footsteps. And once they really get going, that's how they can take off, just like we saw some of those giraffes running in Mike's video.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So the last section that we have is what have scientists learned about by studying different variations? So if we take some of the research that Mike has done, let's see some of the things that they have learned about. So one really important variation is that neck length is important because it helps them compete for the best food. Remember Nick talked about it earlier about the giraffes reaching the leaves that no one else can. Well, even within giraffe populations, if you look at that picture on the right here, you can see that they all have different neck lengths. So the giraffe that has the longest neck is going to be able to reach the leaves and the food at the top, whereas the giraffe that has the shorter neck is not going to get as much of a food option. So
you can think about that with your friends and in your fellow classmates. Sometimes it's that one classmate who is the tallest member of your group of friends who can actually reach the really hard to reach things on the top of a shelf. That means they can get things that can help out everyone else too.
Yep, exactly. Okay, another thing that scientists have learned. One other thing that we wanted to bring up is the food that they eat. So you saw them feeding. Giraffes love to eat acacia. So this is the acacia tree over here on the left. But if you were to zoom in on it, you could see that the acacia tree is full of thorns. So they have really strong and tough tongues that help them kind of navigate through those thorns and pull off the leaves. All right. Another thing that they have learned is that the giraffes, they help see predators coming. So we have two pictures here. So I said that earlier that the lion is one of the main predators for a giraffe. And so having that really tall neck helps them keep an eye out for those predators sneaking up. But if you look at the picture on the right, you can also see that there are lots of other animals that kind of hang out with giraffes because they also use that advantage to help keep an eye out for prey. So they help keep all the prey animals safe. And then here is the slide that we have about the horns. So those horns on the top are called ossicones, And they are a bony structure. So we see the picture here. And the males with the biggest ossicones, they will use them to fight. So the male that has the biggest and strongest ossicones usually wins. And one interesting thing about ossicones is when they're born, when all giraffes are born, they're really soft. So they lay flat on the back of their heads, and then afterwards they kind of get stronger and they pop up.
Yeah. And we can see, especially in the photo, there's a way you can experiment with this as well. What we're seeing, if you were to take, just like our experiment earlier, where if your hands are two giraffe heads and hold them up, what we see there are two boy giraffes who are side by side. And what they're doing, they are knocking their necks one into the other. And that's actually how they, like we say here in the slide, it's how they fight with one another. The one who has not only the biggest ossicones is going to be, who might be a stronger fighter, but it might also be the giraffe that has a thicker neck. So when they're there, they're just neck one right into the other, because when you have a really long neck, it's important, but that's also, like we said, with the giraffe that was drinking, that can make them very vulnerable. So when giraffes are fighting with one another, they know, hey, this is a sensitive area for me. It's a sensitive area for you too. So that's where we see the males fighting with one another.
All right. And then one of my favorite variations amongst the giraffes is that if you really look closely at the patterns, there are 9 different types of giraffes. I know when I learned that fact, I thought it was really interesting. So I put a picture there of all the different types of giraffes around the world. If you just look at those spot patterns, the colors are different, the shapes of the spots are different. And then on the left right there, there's a map, and it kind of shows you which area those giraffes are from. I think if I was a scientist, I would be interested in studying the different types, where they come from. So maybe the Angolan one, it looks like it's from a really deserty place, really dry, maybe very hot. So I wonder how the spots of the Angolan giraffe would help them survive, or if it does, if it plays any variation in their survival skills. So that's a really interesting thing that I think a lot of people don't know, is how many different types of giraffes there are. At our zoo, I believe we have mostly Maasai giraffes. Nick, do you know if that's...
Yes, there are, of all these different species of giraffes that we can see, actually only a small number of them, but usually 3 or so, are the giraffes that we would typically see at any zoo that you may visit, which would be the Maasai giraffe, the reticulated giraffe, or the Rothschild. Those are typically the 3 species that we see. And when you go to any zoo, it's more rare that you might see a group that's mixed, because there are differences between them. Sometimes animals that are very similar, even though they're all giraffes, they might get along. Sometimes there are differences that they may not get along. So that's why we usually see only one or the other at any particular place that they may live. Just like in the wild, where you can see in the map, there are so many different little spots across the continent of Africa, which is where that species, the population for those animals lives. It's very separate, but there's still a chance they may interact with each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that is all for our presentation, but I have one more quick little video here to show you. And it goes back to the giraffes running. So that was a great question that, oh, I don't know why this doesn't like it.
And when you watch them run, look at the stride. Look at how long it is from one footstep falling, one hoof falling to the next. And even when they're running, how they have to balance that incredibly long neck, just how it moves with them as their bodies are running.
Yeah. If I look closely at their neck, it looks like a wave as they're running.
Yeah.
Motion.
Again, another great experiment to try, just like we practiced earlier. However long you can hold your hand up in the air to make it seem like you're a giraffe, how long you can do that, then try running with your hand up in the air high like that and see how much of a challenge that is, and that helps us feel what it's like to be a giraffe when we're running.
Okay, so those are all the slides that we have for you today. Are there any last questions that we want to answer before we say goodbye?
There's a couple. They're asking about the giraffe's tongue. Why is it purple or black?
Yes, that is a great question. So if you look at that still of the video right now, you can see that giraffes live in really hot habitats. So you can imagine that if you had a pink tongue like we do, they spend all their time sticking it out and trying to get those leaves off those acacia trees. And if you had a pink tongue, it would very likely be sunburned. So having a dark colored tongue, like a dark purple tongue, helps keep it safe so that it doesn't get sunburned.
Yes, it does not mean that the giraffes have been enjoying purple ice cream or popsicles, which is a question we often get from many who come visit at the zoo.
Yep, it's to help keep their their tongue from getting sunburned.
Yeah, and then why do they fight? Another student is asking.
So why giraffes fight? Well, fighting is something that we see, and we often refer to it in the animal world as competition or a contest. And sometimes we think about that like when we play games. Many games are like a competition. If you were to play dodgeball or baseball or Red Rover or whatever game that you like to play, you know, that's a type of competition. And in nature, competitions are really important because they're tied in with survival. So for the giraffes that are fighting, those boy giraffes who are fighting with one another, that means that if whoever is the winner may have more territory or may have more access to food or might have, you know, a different group of friends, giraffes, especially girl giraffes that they get to spend time with. So that's usually when we see fights. A funny thing about fighting in the animal world overall, it's usually if those two animals feel like they have a 50-50 chance of winning. If it's a much bigger giraffe and a much smaller giraffe, like one with a bigger neck, one with a smaller neck, usually the smaller competitor may back down and may not try and start a fight because that may mean I'm probably going to lose or I might get hurt. So they may run away and try again maybe when they're a little bit bigger. But if they think they've got an even chance, 50-50, that's usually where we see fights like that, like those two giraffes that were knocking necks with one another, because someone's going to win, and that might mean they get more acacia trees to eat or they get a bigger home that they get to call their own.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you, Nick. I want to thank you, Renee, for being with us today and taking us on this virtual field trip. It was a treat. I know this is one of my daughter's favorite animals, and I set her up in the living room, so she's watching us over there. But thank you very much. Thank you, boys and girls and teachers. If for some reason you weren't able to get this feed, it's recorded. So just go onto the YouTube channel, the link, and you'll see it there.
Great. Thank you so much for having us today. It's our pleasure joining.
So much fun to get to talk about giraffes and get to bring, you know, what we know about them and share them with all of you here with you, Pedro, as well as with everyone who's there watching us at home right now.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye, girls and boys.
Take care.